So you see that there's a power in asking a group of people. So there's a power of the crowd, and there's knowledge of the crowd. And the average of the crowd sometimes is very close to the reality. But if you have one person that starts, it can take a completely different direction. Hi there, welcome in this video. This video is about bias and framing. And those are super important elements when it comes to microtesting, polling, and doing market research as a whole. But let's focus on bias. So what is bias? A bias is any tendency which prevents unprejudiced consideration of a question. And there are some examples. Daniel Kahneman is what we call the name. He wrote a book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and he has some examples of the different forms of bias. And one of them is a story that he tells, some research that they did about a group of people in a room, and there was a jar with marbles. And people have to guess the amount of marbles in the jar. And they had two ways of doing it. One was that they did it public. So there was one person said something, another person said something, and so on. And what turned out is that the two groups of people, so the other group was they had to do it individually and have to write it on a note, and then bring it to the front. So when they did it in public, so they asked the first person to say, okay, 2,346 marbles in the jar. All the people that responded after him were close around the number that he mentioned, but in the end it turned out it was 7,000 something. I'm just making up the numbers, don't know exactly. Then the other group where everybody had to do it individually, the numbers fluctuated a lot. And what turned out, if they did a computation with both of the groups, they said, okay, we take the average of both groups. The groups where they did it public was everything was close around the first number that was mentioned. Everybody was biased that might be in a good direction. And in the other group, they took the average of everybody that said it more in private. They wrote it down, and then they took the average of the total, and it was plus minus 5% to the exact number of the marbles in the jar. So you see that there's a power in asking a group of people. So there's a power of the crowd, and there's knowledge of the crowd. And the average of the crowd sometimes is very close to the reality. But if you have one person that starts, it can take a completely different direction. Well, that's bias. Another situation what they had, what he's writing about in the book, is they did a test with straws. They had the length of a straw, 4 straws were on the board, and there were 10 people in the room, 9 of them being actors, and one of them actually being a real person. And it was pretty obvious that one of the straws was smaller than the other 3. So, but they had first these 9 actors, they asked the question, and they all said, yeah, it's D. And D was actually one of the normal lengthy ones. There were 3 almost similar. One was obviously smaller. So they first asked the 9 actors, and they all said it's D, it's D, it's D. And then they came to the non-actor in the room, and it was funny to see that actually this person also mentioned D. And later they asked the person, but why did you choose option D? Well, if you thought it was option A was kind of obvious. And he said, well, I'm not sure, but 9 people in front of me, they said D, so they might see something I don't see. And that biased his opinion so that he thought, well, it should be D if everybody mentions D, and I don't want to look stupid and mention option A. So those are certain forms of bias. And in politics, this happens a lot in influencing people, influencing the public opinion. So it happens all the time and everywhere. And if con men, for example, they're very good at it. They know how to influence your opinion. Mentalists know how to do it. They can have you mention a number, in a room of 400 people. Almost 400 people have exactly the same triangle that they write, or the star that they write on a paper. They have been influenced before, but they didn't notice, right? So they were all biased into doing something. They thought it was their own opinion, but it was not. So great salespersons as well, they know how to do stuff like this. So those are elements of bias. And in microtesting or polling, this can happen as well. So another form of bias is the brain tendency to avoid cognitive load, which is a safety mechanism of the brain to make sure we're not, becoming crazy. But our brains are naturally lazy. And maybe you know about it, that there's a YouTube video you can search for. It's like a group of people tossing a ball around. And the question is asked in the beginning of the video, please count the amount of times that the ball is touched. And then the video starts playing and you start counting like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like I think it's 12 or 13. And then at the end it says, okay, what did the monkey do in the group of people? And you're like, what monkey? And then you replay the video and you see clearly there's a monkey dressed person dancing and making weird moves in the group of people, and you didn't notice. Like, it's completely irrelevant to the video, completely irrelevant to the people like tossing a ball around, but your brain simply didn't notice because you were focused on something else. That's another form of like bias, or how the brain works. That's how the brain is actually kind of lazy. Another situation is if I ask you to tell me what product you would buy and why, and I show you like 4 black colored products and 1 white one, that same laziness of the brain comes into play, because the 4 almost identical black products and let's say a mouse mat and there's 1 white one, your brain automatically will say, well, this one is better. It stands out, but that's the laziness of the brain. So that is stuff you have to avoid. If there's like 2 white ones and 3 black ones, it's already less than that. But you should avoid 2 things. And actually, it is something, don't overthink this element. It is fairly simple to, avoid 80% of bias with just normal common sense. And, as everything, striving for perfection is a serious, it costs you too much time and too much effort, and it's not worth it. So I think you will have bias in everything you do and every question that you ask. And I hope by now in this video that's clear. So you cannot avoid everything of it, but you can minimize it. And minimizing it in a product test or in a micro test or in a poll is how you actually put a stack of products together. So if you, for example, have 4 black ones, what I said, and 1 white one, people will naturally pick the white one. It will come out as the winner out of the 5 options, where that is not actually the winner, which is better. So you have to help the brain of the people you're asking, to avoid this kind of natural selection process. And you can do that 2 ways. So there's 2 questions you can ask. Question 1 is there one single element that stands out too much from the rest of the products in my stack, right? Second question, is there one item that is almost identical to another one in the stack? And if that question is yes, then people will naturally not pick that as a winner because there's another one that looks almost identical, right? So, but if you have those elements, so if one of these questions you have to answer with yes, right? So is there one single item that stands out too much from the rest? You say, well, there's one item that looks completely different. I have, for example, 4 standalone products and 1 with a packaging and a product and some kind of insert in the image, an image. That stands out so much that you help the brain too much into like choosing this one as being the better one, which is not, that doesn't have to be. I mean, some of the others can actually be a winner if you just mix up, the stack. So what you do in that case, if the question, the answer to the first question, if there's another one that stands out too much, what you do, you add another one. So you replace one of the ones that are, looking kind of the same, and you add another one that looks different from the 3 or 4 remaining ones. So now you have 2 ones that stand out. That will diminish automatically, instantly, over 80% of the bias, because now there's another option that looks completely different, right? If you have, for the second question, an item that looks almost identical to another one in your stack, simply replace it with one that looks a little bit different. So if you have 4 black ones and a white one, simply add a gray one or 2 gray ones and a black one and 2 white ones, right? Then you have a stack that avoids bias. Another way that we in Intellivy educate how to avoid bias is, that's more in the process itself. We always test against a baseline score. So we say you start with a baseline. And baseline, is a statistically or a statistical scientific thing that came into play in the, well, I think hundreds of years ago already, where they say if you try to test something, always test it to a baseline. So if you have data results on a baseline, anything else you do where most of the baseline is identical, you can see differences and changes and modifications. So that's why we stress and focus always on, create a baseline score, create a baseline of items, test your item against it, make your modifications against exactly the same baseline. Because one thing you know for sure, the balance between the baseline will most likely stay almost similar to a certain, extent. So that's how you can do it in Intellivy. So there's ways of actually that we avoid it in the education, and the way that you can avoid it simply by common sense. And again, don't overthink this element. It is super important, so don't underestimate it either. It is important, but it's quite fairly simple to fix. And in Intellivy, we actually help you through the process step by step with a little bit more questions, but this is the simple answer to avoid bias. Okay, now framing. Framing is something else. Framing is putting the people in the right setting in order to get a good and valuable answer out of them. And in Intellivy, we use several forms of framing. So one of the framing elements is we mimic a marketplace. So we do that by several marketplaces we have. For example, Amazon, we mimic the Amazon marketplace, both mobile and desktop. So if we have the members, applying for the campaign on their mobile, it actually mimics the mobile interface of Amazon Marketplace. If they do it on desktop, we mimic the desktop marketplace search results. And then they have to choose one product over the other and give us a reason why. And as you have seen, you can actually blur out the stars, the price, and the title if you want to test, for example, the main image. And we do that for a reason, because it's if you put only an image, you say, okay, which image do you like most? That's the wrong framing, because it doesn't matter if an image is nice. You want to know if people would buy a certain item. So you have to put them into you have to frame them in a position. I am a buyer on a store searching for a product that I'm, considering to buy. And that's the right framing. And we do that with subconscious framing, which is mimicking the marketplace. And then we have the conscious framing, which is putting a situation in place. So we say, okay, you're a person and you have a problem, so certain problem aware, and you're looking for a solution like, and then we mentioned a solution. And you can make that as long as you want, but that's like a very simple version of it. And then you say, okay, which product would you buy and why? And that's important because that's how you do the conscious framing. Like, okay, I'm a dog owner, I'm looking for a dog cage for in my house, and because my dog is running around, which of those items presented would you buy and why? And then they see 5 dog cages, and they can choose one. If you just ask like which image is nice, the best, that only gives you like an impression of, I like this image because of the style, because of the color, because of the nice graphics, because of whatever it might be. But that's not what you're after. Like, you're on a marketplace, you want to win the click of a customer, right? So that's why you put people in a conscious and subconscious shopping environment framing. And that's what Intellivy does as well. So those are the simple elements about framing and bias. There's a much more to say about this, but I hope this helps and gives you like some advice of not overthinking it, and how you can use it practically in your microtesting environment. Thanks for listening and watching, and good luck.